Welcome to Upstream. I'm Shane Morris. Well, I'm a dad of 3, soon to be 4 small children, which means, among other things, that I watch a lot of animated movies. And that's fine with me because I've actually always enjoyed the art, music, and storytelling in kids' movies, sometimes more than grown-up fare. But from a fairly early age, I realized that animation directed at children is never just entertainment. If it's done cleverly, there's always a second tier of meaning and significance, and I'm not just talking about the pop culture references designed to make adults chuckle. I'm talking about the main lesson, the moral message of the story that resolves the conflict and embeds itself in young imaginations. The lessons that characters learn in Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, or other studios' animations aren't often spelled out in so many words like Sunday school lessons, but they can be just as influential on our kids' lives and their decisions. And that means we have to be discerning and cognizant of these messages, especially since the imaginations behind them aren't always or even usually Christian. Well, 2 recent animated features illustrate this problem of mixed messages, and I'm far from the only one who's noticed. Today I'm joined by someone who has been a keen observer and reviewer of kids' movies for quite some time. Paul Asay is an award-winning journalist, author, and movie critic for Focus on the Family's Plugged In. He's been published in Time, The Washington Post, and Christianity Today, and he writes regularly at his Pathos blog, Watching God. He got my attention last week with a terrific reflection at Plugged In titled Why Encanto is Better Than Turning Red in Every Way. And today I want to talk with Paul about the messages in animation, good, bad, and somewhere in between. Paul Asay, welcome to Upstream. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you're a big fan of Pixar, which is, of course, one of the best animation studios and has been since, I guess, 1994 or so. And for a while now has been owned by Disney. They were acquired by Mickey's empire. And you say that Pixar has frequently succeeded in communicating unsexy truths. What do you mean by that?
Man, I tell you what, Pixar historically has been so good at what I think we parents would call just communicating values. And there's nothing more unsexy in some ways than talking about how you should live your life, right? When I think about Pixar movies, you think about responsibility, you think about duty, you think about this idea of sacrifice, the idea of honoring. This sounds a little bit overblown, but even honoring your father and mother. One of the movies that struck me probably the most was probably one of Pixar's lesser films, Brave, which really dealt with this idea of a teen girl trying to push against some of the boundaries that her parents had set, especially her mother. But we see so much from her mother's side too, why it's important that she embrace these values. You know, she's going to be ruling this kingdom, so she needs to be available to sort of embrace some of those things that she has to do. Those are not easy things to communicate in a fun, funny, beautiful story, and yet Pixar has been able to do that.
You can see that right from the beginning, where Toy Story, even going back to the 90s, is about this sort of giving up these delusions of grandeur and sort of sinking into real life, and then finding your purpose, not in this externalization of some internal dream of self-expressive individualism, but in figuring out what your nature is. What is your intrinsic nature? You are a toy, right? And it's about learning to not only accept that but also love it. And that, which is why I felt like the 4th Toy Story was such a horrible betrayal of the series, because it's about it reverses that. It says forget the previous 3 movies where it was all about reconciling yourself with being a toy and loving being there for children. Now it's just going to be I'm on my own. I'm by myself. I'm going to live my own life. And I hated that message, despite the how beautiful the animation was and how well it was pulled off and how far things have gone artistically. But yeah, you see that with Pixar again and again and again. Probably in my mind, the pinnacle of it is Up, where my
favorite Pixar movie. Honestly,
mine as well.
It's beautiful.
So in light of all this, you say Pixar has gotten it unambiguously right again and again. What do you think the Pixar formula is or has been? What makes them stand out most of the time? Because I know they do work with a formula.
You know, it's a really interesting question, and I think that it is sort of, Pixar has always been about telling, in some ways, stories that have never been told in the form of animation before. You know, I think that Up is a beautiful example of that. It deals with, you know, the unsexiest of topics, right? Especially for kids, grief, the idea of moving on after grief. And you just have this beautiful resonant message. If you're not crying after the first 12, 15 minutes of Up, you just don't have a soul, right? It is a wonderful, wonderful story. So somehow I think that there's two things. I think number one, they pick out these themes and take them in a different direction than has ever been taken in animation before. They dig down into some very meaty issues. They don't talk down to their audience, which is really impressive. I think that sometimes when you watch animated movies, they can feel silly, they can feel light, they can feel, and of course that's what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be fun, they're supposed to be good for kids, all that kind of stuff. But Pixar takes its storytelling seriously. It seems to delve into the idea that kids are more mature than sometimes we adults give them credit for. They think about big issues and they wonder about big things, and they feel so deeply. Pixar seems to understand that in a way that many other storytellers just have not gotten. And the other tool, I think, is that they really do make their movies a lot for adults. Again, Up is a great example of that, right? It really speaks to the parents and the audience. We find that we get more out of this in some ways than the kids. You know, while you know our sons and daughters are laughing at Doug chasing squirrels or all that kind of stuff, we're dealing with some deep themes that maybe we most effectively deal with actually while sitting in a movie theater. Yeah,
there's even the part where Russell says that the woman he's just referred to is not his mom, right? Mm-hmm. And he just kind of looks at you, and Carl realizes, you see him realize that, oh, this kid's from a broken family, and like, wow, okay, I mean, this is a while back. This is 2009. I don't know if you can even imply that a mother and father married to each other, present with the children, is the best family form today, but they were doing it back in 2009, and it was astonishing. But so let's talk about Disney now, because Disney has obviously acquired Pixar. They're exercising some degree of control, and both of these movies actually are distributed by Disney, the ones we're going to talk about here. So is there a Disney formula? What sets them apart historically from Pixar?
You know, historically, obviously Disney is connected with family fare and has been ever since the 1930s, and that has they've done some beautiful, amazing work as well. You know, they sort of spearheaded the whole movement of animated movies and making entertainment for kids, and so they really set the template in a lot of ways. But one thing that I had noticed just over the last couple of decades, I think, which dates me quite a bit, is just the fact that a lot of these Disney stories are really individually focused, right? Where Pixar movies tend to focus in on more of a relational, collective type of sense. You're thinking about your family. You're thinking about the how you can benefit others, how you can serve others. Disney has often been about following your dreams, chasing after what you want, what you need from life. In some ways, I think that the movie you mentioned at the outset, Toy Story, is a really good example of sort of that dividing line between Pixar and Disney historically. You know, because I think that Disney has often said that you can be anything you want. And sometimes that's manifested in beautiful ways. Pinocchio wanting to be a real boy. There's a lot of fantastic messages within there. But you know, Toy Story flips that around, says, You are a toy. You cannot fly, no matter how much you want it, no matter how much you work for it.
It's kind of a reverse Pinocchio in a way. Yeah.
It really is. It really is. It says, this is who you are. And that's beautiful. That's great. Enjoy who you are. And I think that there's positives to both of those, but when you take sort of that Disney message of following your heart, following your dreams, you risk it becoming self-focused. And I think that's some of what we've seen in Disney properties as of late.
So the elephant in the room, of course, is a recent series of Zoom videos that leaked or were put out of Disney administrators, employees, talking about the not so subtle gay message that they want to push in their entertainment. So LGBT, sexual revolution, very progressive messaging is supposed to be now explicit in Disney movies or much more at the front and center. And we can talk about that in a minute. I want to obviously acknowledge that and let my listeners know we are not ignoring that. I want to weave this into the conversation. But before we start saying bad things about Disney, you had some really good things to say about Disney's, I think it's their latest, and it's called Encanto. And I know it because, well, I've watched it a couple times now, thanks to my daughter, and she is constantly singing "We Don't Talk About Bruno" with her friends. So, so tell me about Encanto, and then contrast it with Pixar's latest for me.
You bet. Encanto feels in some ways like a great Pixar movie, even though it's released by Disney. Essentially, you have the story of a girl named Mirabelle. She's a young teen. She lives with her magical family in this magical house, and she is the only one in the entire family who doesn't have magical powers. During the course of the movie, she realizes that things are not as magical as they seem. This house that they all live in starts to develop cracks. She starts to see a few little weaknesses in some strong family members. The pressures of the family are just getting to all of them in some ways. And so Mirabelle takes it on herself to try to figure out what's going wrong. And she discovers through Bruno, you won't talk about Bruno, but we're going to talk about him, through this vision of Bruno, that she is key to something about the family. Either she can heal the house or she might be the cause of it breaking apart. The thing I loved about this movie is that it really deals with some of the same issues that I talked about earlier with Brave. It's this young teen who's trying to figure out who she is apart from her family. But the thing that I loved about it is that it does it within the context of the family. She loves her family, the Madrigals. She wants the best for them. She deeply cares for their well-being, and she'll do anything she can to protect them. During the course of the story, we come to see just that depth of love and affection, and even as she's pushing against some of the strictures that her family has laid on her, it's all in the cause of the family. It's all to preserve and protect and repair the damage that has been done to the family. And I loved that. It felt so responsible, it felt so resonant, told in such a beautiful way, I thought. It was one of my favorite movies of last year.
And that message is very conservative too. It's you contrast this idea that she's for the we, the us, not just the I. She's out for the interest of the family. And even the movie itself ends in the home, whereas this other movie that Pixar has recently released, it's called Turning Red, and I hadn't seen it until like 2 weeks ago. It has a very different sort of ending and trajectory. So describe that one for us and contrast this weird reversal that's happened between Disney and Pixar.
So again, it deals with some of the very, very same issues that we find in Encanto. Again, the main protagonist here is this young teen girl Pei, who also loves her family. She's also dealing with the expectations and the duties that come along with being part of this family. Her mom really has extremely high expectations for her. As Pei enters puberty, she finds that her own experience in adolescence is a little bit different from most girls, in that she turns into a giant red panda when her emotions get out of hand. Now, we can read that obviously metaphorically and take it to some other directions, but taking it on its surface level, you've got this giant panda that you've got to deal with. So it is an interesting movie in that Pei pushes against some of her family's strictures, as does Mirabel and Encanto, but her push becomes more and more we focused. I think I said her name was Pei. It's actually May. It becomes more and more me focused. She is pushing away from her family toward her friends. She's pushing away from what her family wants her to do and toward what she wants to do. And again, this is a normal struggle that all of us sort of deal with in one way or another in adolescence. We all separate from our parents. We all sort of analyze what we want from life, what we need to be our own person. But the way in which it manifests itself in Turning Red is different. It manifests itself, I think, in a more selfish way, where Encanto is all about finding your place as an individual within the family. Turning Red was more about finding the individual away from the family. We actually see her at the end of the movie actually leaving the family business to spend time with her friends. And she just goes off, and there's this lingering doubt as to how that familial relationship is going to wind up. So I thought it was a well-made movie. I thought it was fun. It was funny. And yet some of the messages there, I think, were kind of irresponsible, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
I just didn't like the messaging.
Yeah, irresponsible and very un-Pixar in a way. There was
very un-Pixar.
You keep waiting for the complicating factor, right? With Pixar movies, there's typically something that will thwart that desire for raw, basic self-expression with a conflicting need for communal good, like the collective good, for
right.
Working for the family, or for the toys in Andy's room, or for the well-being of your your people, I mean, there's all these examples you can go, or the well-being of the anthill, whatever.
Yeah.
But and not in a kind of socialistic way, but in a very, I think, conservative way, because it's all
right.
It's about
right.
these little platoons, these mediating institutions, the things that make us human in context, not just in isolation. But Turning Red just really lands with a thunk right on individualism.
Right.
It's like to the point where the main character even says, "My panda, my choice" at the end, which is of course a play off of the Planned Parenthood pro-choice, "My body, my choice." Yeah. So.
Yeah, it just made me cringe, honestly. And it felt, for Pixar, again, Pixar has set the bar so high.
Mm-hmm.
And we expect when we go into a Pixar movie to find 4 or 5 rich, deep, beautiful layers that you can really dig your teeth into. I find myself, the best Pixar movies, I find myself thinking about for days afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
I think Inside Out was a wonderful, wonderful movie talking about some of these same issues, growing up and growing into yourself. And it gave me a whole new vocabulary really to talk about emotions. Even Soul, which was just a year or two ago, I thought was a wonderful, wonderful metaphysical journey. But this one felt superficial. It felt like any cartoon that could be made by any company. And I think it felt like a cartoon. It didn't feel like a rich animated movie.
Yeah, that's a good point. In many ways, the disappointment comes from the fact that it sets up the type of story that could have been taken in a much more complex and meaningful direction, where there could have been a sort of reconciliation of the tradition and the family, receiving the riches of the past and then integrating those with the with your current situation and self, which is what a lot of Pixar movies have done. Where I mean, even if you look at Encanto, that's exactly what it is. It's like, here, I'm going to bring forward the past. I'm going to redeem it from its internal cracks and flaws, and create a new and better order that honors the past. And they're both toxic matriarchies. They're both set up where there's a domineering mother figure who is kind of the source of the problems. And we should be fair and say that the mother and daughter are reconciled at the end of Turning Red, but it's basically through giving her free reign.
That's exactly
do your
it.
thing.
That's exactly it. Yes, you're a teenager. You're 13. You can make your own choices now. And I think I'm sure that as a father of 3 soon to be 4 kids, that may feel, I don't know, 13 sounds maybe a little bit earlier for that. And to riff off of a little bit what you're saying, the other thing that struck me about Turning Red, and this was something that Christianity Today also pointed out, was the movie also embraces essentially the idea that we are all imperfect, which is true, but not only that we accept that fact, but that it's just a part of us, that we shouldn't necessarily be working on it as God sort of tells us that we should, right? I think that I found it interesting that in the end, May chooses to and spoiler warning for anybody who hasn't seen it, but essentially decides to, there's this ceremony that allows her to separate from her panda, this messy, really destructive side of her. She decides not to go through with it and keep the panda as a part of herself. That's really nice in a way. Her father gives her a beautiful message about how sometimes we have to make room for the messy sides of ourselves. And there's some truth in that, I think, but it sort of undercuts the idea, we are all messy, we are all imperfect, but every day we should try to do a little bit better, to try to improve ourselves, to turn ourselves into the people that we can be, and not necessarily just accept and embrace the fact that we can really be cruddy human beings at times. I think that there's that push that we all need to be better for the people around us, for our spouses, for our families, for our friends. We always need to strive to be better than we are.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of character development in that either. I think of the moment where, in Finding Nemo, to draw another Pixar story into it, where Marlin shouts at Dory, "You think you can do these things, but you just can't." He's like repeating the words that he said to Nemo earlier in the story. And of course, Finding Nemo is all about, you've got to let your children grow up. You've got to allow some risk in their life, because there's a trade-off between risk and meaning. And that's what he learns, right? But there's no point at which the hero of Turning Red has to kind of confront the villain within herself like that and curb her own desires and wishes. She kind of wins.
She just kind of wins. Yeah, it felt, again, I felt like the movie it just went in what I would consider an irresponsible direction. Again, there are some lovely messages in here too, but they are mixed with these problematic messages that as a parent, I think you have to watch out for a little bit.
Yeah, so there's another contrast, and tell me if you notice this one. In Turning Red, you have a gift that apparently has no purpose. So when we initially were introduced to the whole idea of like the panda thing, it was supposed to be for fighting crime, right? And I thought, well, here you go. Here's the purpose, right? She's gonna become some sort of superhero figure and have to learn how to use her powers responsibly. It's just gonna be like Spider-Man, right? What does he do? At first, he uses them for selfish gain, and then he figures out, oh, I have a higher responsibility with this power, and she. At no point in the movie does she actually use this or move toward using this for any kind of purpose. In Encanto, you have no gift and a purpose. So the main character has a lack of a gift in contrast to all those around her. and the lack of gift is the purpose in the story, and she gives that lack of gift as its own gift to her family, and that's what makes it so cool and complicated.
That is wonderful. That is totally wonderful. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because what you have in Encanto is you get this sense in Encanto that Mirabel is a gift in and of herself. And I love that message. You know, she may not be as pretty as one of her sisters. She may not be as strong as another one. But there is a beauty and a power within her that sort of transcends them all. And I think it gets back to the point that we are all beautiful creatures, that in our individuality we are created in a wonderful, meaningful pattern. We are all, even when we can feel not as good as some of the people around us, that's not the way God sees it. That's not the way we should see ourselves. We all have a deep, deep purpose, and we can all become part of the tapestry of existence.
You posit this idea, you propose that something has happened, where there's kind of this reversal that's taken place, and it's maybe too early to tell whether this two studios, Disney and Pixar, which are in cahoots but also doing their own thing, have changed places. But it seems like that's the trajectory, and I would take it back a little bit further even and show that I don't know that I would knock a lot of recent Pixar fare. For instance, I did like Soul as well. In fact, I wrote a review for Breakpoint saying a lot of positive things about it. My one complaint was that it was so complicated; it was hard to keep up with. Just so much plot going on there. But
absolutely.
But Disney has really been picking up their game in terms of the messaging of their animated features. So obviously there's a Frozen every so often, and I can't get into that. I don't know what the deal is with Frozen, but but boy, I really liked Moana, which was okay. So Moana bucked a lot of trends for me. The main character is not a strong female warrior. She's not out there, swinging the sword, kung fu, kicking the bad guys into oblivion, and just in short doing things that someone who weighs 115 pounds shouldn't be able to do, which is what a lot of what happens in popular media these days with heroines. She goes out to restore order in a broken world by being a steward of that order on behalf of her people, right? And the whole movie is about remembering who you are. So she helps her people remember who they are. They're seafarers. She helps Maui remember who he is. He's this mischievous but ultimately good and courageous god. She helps the island, right? The lava island, Motunui is her place. I forget what the name is of the lava island, but she helps this personified island remember who she is and come back to her nature. And so it's all like a rediscovering the past sort of thing. And in the climactic moment, she resolves the conflict by taking that stewarding role and putting back the thing that was broken. And there's even a lot of Eden imagery there, where there's like a restored garden,
right.
And the jewel is almost like a fruit that was taken by the Lucifer, the lovable Lucifer figure, right? He's almost like a who stole the fire and gave it to man.
Oh, Prometheus.
Prometheus, yeah, he's a Prometheus figure, right?
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. And so I thought that was tremendously, positive as a message. Plus, it was artistically beautiful, and that was Disney. That was not Pixar. So it was meaningful in that regard. What do you think about some of the other recent fare? Because we could mention a number of titles.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right. I think ever since Tangled came out, I think that was sort of where, and again, not to diminish what Disney has done. Over all of its history, because it's always had some pretty good properties. But I think Tangled was sort of a tipping point where all of a sudden it saw Pixar on the horizon, right? It saw that it had lost the top seat. And Tangled was sort of Disney's first attempt to really reclaim the title. It's not good enough to just come up with a fun, well-told, creative story. You needed to go deeper. You needed to go farther. And Tangled really did that. And then you went into Big Hero 6. And I actually really liked Frozen. I thought that Frozen, especially because it was made by Disney, did some very interesting things. One of the things that Disney has been known for is just sort of this idea of the princess and being saved and all this kind of stuff. So many of their stories have been so traditional and so beautiful. Nothing wrong with Snow White and Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella. I think that those all have a great place in the canon. But I loved the what Frozen did, where it sort of subverted some of that, and it showed that love can also be between sisters, and it also had sort of this sacrificial message where one sister sacrifices herself for the other, where they are trying to save the kingdom that they have been entrusted with. So it had that sense of, let's look past ourselves and look toward the other. Let's look toward the people we love. Let's look toward the people who are depending on us. And because of that, I thought that Frozen was a really, really strong statement in Disney's canon. One of the funny things about Frozen, I think, is that, the song that everybody, the earwig, Let It Go, that was actually a tragic song. It was the
villain song, essentially.
It's the villain song, exactly. They did a terrible thing in making it so beautiful and catchy, right? Because it became sort of this statement of independence instead of this statement of aloneness, of apartness. And that was sort of one of the things that I think the beautiful messages of Frozen can get a little bit mixed up because of that one song.
It's like the villain song upstaged everything else. It's almost as if you came away from The Lion King singing "Be Prepared," as your takeaway.
Right, like, exactly.
Great, you've identified with Scar. Well done. But of course, in this case, it's more complicated because the heroine is also the villain in a way. So she has a personal journey. Right. And I've noticed a lot of Disney stuff is doing that. And here we are, two dads talking about Frozen, which I did not expect at the beginning of this week to be doing, but here I am, and life comes at you fast. But as you look at something like that, there is a weird sort of Rorschach element to it, where you look at these movies and you read into them whatever you kind of take with you. And so for a hyper individualistic, self-expressive culture, for whom giving voice to your inner self is everything, and being true to who you really are deep down inside, whatever that may be, is everything. Let It Go came to be seen as the message of the movie, or the anthem. In fact, I heard it described as a coming out anthem, and that's why so many gay and lesbian viewers latched on to Elsa and said, well, this is my character, not really noticing that at the end that's kind of repudiated, and she she leaves her ice castle and goes back to her responsibilities and her relationships. So I mean, yeah, I guess my dislike of Frozen is much more on an artistic level, but that's neither here nor there.
Olaf, you're so funny. Oh, man. Okay, anyway,
don't get me started. So there are a lot of other Disney and Pixar fare, and some of them are so similar that you sort of lose track of who's who, right? Like the two WreckIt Ralphs. Who did those? That was Disney, I think. I don't think Pixar was involved in that. But WreckIt Ralph had something very similar going on, where it was not a romantic relationship. It was almost a big brother, little sister friendship. And the love that's there, and of course, there's a paternal element too. So that the first one, every time that last line, my kids have watched it about 15,000 times. But every time that last line hits, where he's like, "I love the end of the day because the Nicelanders lift me up, and I get to see Vanellope, and if that little kid thinks I'm okay, maybe I'm not such a bad guy after all." It was just like, okay, you got me, Disney, for the 15,000th time.
No, they really do. One of the things that has marked a lot of the most recent Disney fare is just sort of this idea of the switch, right? In WreckIt Ralph, you have this villain, this video game villain who really becomes the hero, and we see something deeper and more resonant within him. And I think that's one of the things that both Disney and Pixar do really, really effectively is allow us to see richness and complexity in characters that perhaps we might have assumed are a little more one-dimensional. And just to riff off a little bit of what you talk about, you often bring in as much as you take out of a movie, right? That's one of the reasons why Encanto was so resonant with me, quite frankly, because ironically, I had just bought, my parents are getting a little bit older. My mom's not moving around very much as well anymore, and so we just bought this big multi-generational house that, we have 3 generations all living together. So the idea of this house holding all these generations, all these people, all with these very disparate, weird personalities that you have to deal with, just hit me straight in the heart, and it moved me on a level that I was not expecting because of it. And I think that's often why these movies resonate with us as strongly as they do, because we see something in our own journeys within those. In Up, all of us have grieved. In Toy Story, we've all dreamed about being something that we haven't been able to be. You have these elements that we're able to draw in, and all of a sudden the stories become a part of us. And I think that's something that makes them so, so powerful.
I want to mention one more that I really love before we kind of get into some of the background of what's going on at Disney and how this stuff comes out. And that is Coco, which I believe was Pixar. So Coco was one I will get on my soapbox about all day long, because I think it was one of the most conservative animated films to come out in the last decade. It's obviously set in Mexico. You got this Day of the Dead imagery, which is super weird, and because like half the main characters are skeletons, right? And so I guess there's this immediately challenging element to get into that. And also because that stuff is legitimately dark. I mean, that's even the Catholic Church, where that's like an offshoot of Catholic piety, has said, guys, you got to stop doing this. There's no saint death. None of this stuff is real, right? Yeah. Nevertheless, they use that imagery and that Mexican traditional culture to tell a story about the fact that there's a bond between the living and the dead, between the ones you love who are here and the ones you love who have died. And the deeper message is, of course, that the family and the investments you make there are more important than making your dreams come true. So the whole thing in Coco was a repudiation of the just follow your heart, make your dreams come true. Because the guy who followed his heart and left his family to make his dreams come true is the villain. The guy who stuck with his family and let his career go by the wayside in order to make their dream of having a dad a reality. He's the good guy, and in the end, he's repudiated, or he's vindicated, of course.
Yeah,
he is. He gets his day in the sun, and I love that. It was artistically cool too, but that was a amazing message. And it was so countercultural too. And I respect a studio when they can push against the dominant themes and pulls of a cultural moment. So yeah. What do you think about that one?
No, I totally agree. I think that in Coco, it may be the best example of something that we've seen in a lot of Pixar and more recent Disney movies is that you are part of a whole. And I think you're right. Sometimes I think that when we talk about communal or community, we tend to think that those are progressive ideals, but they're really conservative ideals. We are part of a bigger picture. We are products not just of ourselves and our own leanings and our own desires, but we are part of a string that goes back generation after generation after generation. We are made by the people in our lives. And one of the beautiful things about Coco is it honored that, right? It expressed that sense that that we are not alone in the world, that we owe a great debt to those who came before, that we are going to give gifts to those who come after. And as parents, that's really resonant to know that we have a huge influence on the little people in our charge. I love those types of messages where it says, no, listen, it's great to follow your dreams, but the important thing is to love the people in your life well, to care for them deeply, to push them forward to be the people that you know they can be. And when you have a movie that reinforces that in such a beautiful way, as so many of these films that we've talked about do, I think that those are films to be kind of treasured.
There are two themes that I see shifting, both for Pixar and Disney. So we've actually kind of talked a little bit about it in terms of, for instance, WreckIt Ralph, in a positive way. So it's the first is that romantic relationships have gone by the wayside, and are, because that's traditional Disney fare, right? Every princess fell in love and got her Prince Charming for generations, and now those relationships have moved to the sidelines and have been replaced by other types of relationships, friendships, and so I want to drill into that one and figure out what is going on there, and at what point does it become like a marginalization of the family in place of this, friendship-centric worldview that millennials have tended to have. And then the second thing is, I've noticed villains are going by the wayside, traditional villains. So there's almost no like cackling, dark, diabolical figures anymore. You don't have Scar dancing around on the lava with the hyenas. You don't have Jafar, with his snake staff. You don't have Maleficent. All these villains have kind of gone by the wayside, and now typically the villain is either the character themselves or someone they love in their lives who's misunderstood them. So what do you think about those two trends? I mean, am I onto something there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that there is a lot to unpack there, quite honestly. And we'll take on the villain thing first, because I think that is both a good and a bad trend, right? I think that coming from where I do, I never see any of us wearing exactly white or black hats. We all can be, even though we all think of ourselves as heroes in our own stories, we're often the villains in others, right? We've done bad things, we've hurt people that we love, da-da-da-da-da-da. We're sinners, absolutely. So when you have sort of this complexity drilled into some of these villains, and you see this definitely within Disney. You see a lot of these live action remakes. Maleficent is a great example where all of a sudden she's been sort of redeemed, and she was one of the greatest bad guys in all of animated history. I loved her in Sleeping Beauty, but she's become sort of this quasi good guy. We see why she became who she became and all that kind of stuff. And there's some positives to that, because I do think that sometimes what we see as evil isn't necessarily as evil as we imagine it. It's somebody who is making some very, very poor decisions, and there are reasons behind those poor decisions, right? But at the same time, you do have the reality of evil. And so sometimes you do kind of need to have someone in a black hat to reinforce that sometimes evil is there. It needs to be dealt with. It needs to be fought. I don't think that any of us would go into say, World War II and think, well, poor Hitler, he was just misunderstood.
What's his backstory? Yeah,
exactly.
We need a redeeming backstory for Hitler.
Exactly. Yeah. Whatever happened in his life, you still have to fight against it. And so I do kind of miss sometimes those pretty simple bad guys, because I think they also tell us something about the world that we live in. One of my favorite movies actually was The Robinsons. Meet the Robinsons.
Oh yeah, that was an underappreciated classic. Yeah.
Oh, it was so good. Yeah, no one saw it but you and me. But
right.
I really liked it because the bad guy, this truly, he had a mustache that he twirled. He was a terrible guy. But it turned out that his hat was the culprit the entire time.
Right.
So it had sort of this mixture of yes, this guy was making some bad decisions, but there was a reason for it, and it was his hat. You know,
Right.
and I thought that was a charming thing. The family friendship thing is an interesting one, and we saw it quite a bit in Turning Red, where you do have this push toward friendship as at the expense of family, and again, that's a very real dynamic within adolescence.
Specifically, the male-female marital relationship.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's gone.
It is these trends are a little more disturbing in a way, because I do think that they undercut just sort of that again, it's sort of like the hero villain thing that you were talking about. You know, you do have to understand that there is evil in the world that we have to fight. We understand that there are lots and lots of manifestations of love and affection that we can have in society, right? But you never want to hold something up at the expense of marriage, at the expense of family. And I think that can be sort of a problem, you know? I think that can be definitely an issue within the stories that are being told.
Yeah, this was why, for me, Pixar, I believe it was Pixar, their movie Onward from a couple of years ago with Chris Pratt and Tom Holland, you know, Star-Lord and Spider-Man in the leading roles, was such a standout in this regard, and it was kind of underappreciated too for some reason among
hit right as COVID was
listeners. Yeah, right. So it got bombed in the theaters, and then there's the D&D elements too that cause a lot of Christians to go kind of like Coco's Day of the Dead stuff. And then of course there was that obligatory gay moment where they're like, oh yeah, we affirm this, but the whole rest of the movie is about father hunger and about two young men searching for, you know, this relationship with their dead father. And that was beautiful. And then in the end, of course, the big brother ends up being the father figure that his little brother never had. And it was just like, that's excellent. But that was that was a standout. That you know, familial relationship, the traditional family, the biblical natural family, is very either marginal or just completely out of the picture in most of this stuff now. And like you said, there's a balance here, because we don't have to have a romance and the forming of a family in every single story. It's not. Right. It doesn't have to be that way. I loved WreckIt Ralph precisely because it explored this underappreciated uncle, niece, big brother, little sister, whatever you want to call it, friendship that can be formative in people's lives. But at the same time, when the pattern gets to the point where it is, you realize something's going on. And so now we have to talk about, like, where is Disney, where is Pixar going? Because we've obviously seen some recent news stories. There's been public press releases surrounding the new Florida law about education, about gender and sexual identity education in schools. We've seen I guess it was a leak of private Zoom conversations with some Disney administrators who or creative types who are basically saying, yeah, we are going to be explicit with our pro-LGBT messages in the future. We're going to really ramp this stuff up. It was something like, you know, we want 50% of our characters to be members of the LGBTQ community, or whatever. It was some stated goal like that. What's happening here? How do Christians approach this in light of the fact that there still is so much good coming out of the studio? And then why is there still so much good coming out?
You know, it's a fascinating dynamic, and I know that I've talked with Christians who are ready to just check out of Disney completely, right? Yeah. They're ready to say, okay, they've gone too far. I'm just not interested. They're just pushing this agenda. And that is true to an extent, but not all of their properties are doing that. Not all of their products they're still telling some amazing, wonderful stories. And you pointed out Onward that had a very, very brief gay moment and that still had some really fantastic messages in it. So what is a Christian to do with this? It becomes very, very hard. You really have to sort of sift through sift through the stories themselves, because Disney obviously is a company. They are trying to make money first and foremost. Yes, they're trying to tell beautiful stories. They're trying to do what they need to do. But they're also trying to make money. And I think that one of the reasons why we're seeing this switch within kind of their quote-unquote agenda is because they feel like that is the best way to reach the culture where it is now. They feel like the culture has moved enough where there is, I hate to be crass about it, but a financial incentive to move in that direction. I think that there is, and they understand that a lot of their stories have always been deeply, deeply attractive to members of the LGBTQ community. They tell some very resonant stories for that community. So they're both trying to honor their audience, trying to draw in as many people as possible, and they feel like right now we've reached a tipping point where you can tell these stories and bring in more people than you push away. As a parent, as a Christian, you really just have to be super, super aware of the stories that you wish to engage with. And to take it a step further, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you might have to have some conversations with your son or daughter that you might not have wanted to have for a couple of years, where you might have to engage some of these issues. If you want to engage with a story that has some difficult elements that go against your personal leanings, you have to be prepared to talk about those when you see them in a movie. And I think that the parents have a very difficult task ahead of them to prepare themselves for those conversations.
Tell me what you think about this, Paul. I got the sense that these employees who are on these videos talking in these hyper-progressive terms are something of, well, let's just say they don't have the strings of power yet. It seems to me that the real minds that are currently vetting and producing stories at Disney and Pixar are they're very much cooler heads, right? They're very much more in tune with the fact that the majority of the population, the majority of their audience wants to see compelling stories, not propaganda, and that the life experiences out there are, among the life experiences, an LGBTQ whatever experience is going to be a small minority, and so most people need something else to grab onto. And this, like you said, it's a company; they need to make profits, and the people in charge of this are geniuses. I mean, they get paid enormous amounts of money to produce compelling stories that are going to dominate the imagination of generations. They're not going to. On one level, they're not going to throw it all away on propaganda that no one wants to watch. But on another level, I think we do have to admit the trajectory of the company, and that comes down. There's the meta level thing, like looking at Disney as a company and saying the direction they're going is negative. But then there's the really micro level where a new movie comes out and you're like, well, should I let my kids see this or not? And my policy has been to just watch it myself ahead of time and get to know what this thing is. And then if it's positive, I'll let my kids see it. And often there'll be those little like gay moments, because they're throwing a bone to the to that crowd, like a non-Disney movie, the How to Train Your Dragon series. Oh. So that was DreamWorks. In my opinion, it was some of the best stuff they've ever done.
Absolutely.
It was, and the messages were just beautifully resonant and redeeming. But there was that one moment, that one blink and you'll miss it moment, that's super coded and kids don't even get what it means. So I didn't draw the line at that. But there are others where I can sense that there will be lines that need to be drawn in the future. So like Turning Red would be one, I think, cross that line.
Right.
So what do you do as a dad?
Yeah, well, see, I hate to push, the website that I work for, Plugged In, is sort of designed for,
No, please.
To help parents walk through that sort of stuff. We review so many things, and essentially what we do is we sort of break out a lot of the content concerns that moms and dads might be worried about. We talk about those elements so that if you don't have time to watch it ahead of time, you at least know what you're getting into. You can sort of navigate those questions. Is this suitable for my son? Is this suitable for my daughter? If it is, do we need to talk about it afterwards? How much do we need to talk? All that kind of stuff. We try to help you engage with all that. So as parents, I think we just have to be aware, and especially as Christian parents, that the culture is changing. It has changed. And my own opinion is that Christianity has always been at its strongest as a countercultural movement. It has always thrived, as it has always been at its morally strongest when it's been under pressure, when it counteracts the culture that's around it. And I think we're in that place within the United States now. I think that we stand for something, and we stand for something that the culture doesn't necessarily embrace. And when we are in that position where some of our values, some of our views are in the minority, it allows us to really understand and express for our kids and for ourselves too why we believe what we believe. Why do we embrace what we embrace? What is the foundation? Why do we think? Why do we feel the way we do? I think that the culture as it is allows us in a strange sort of way to strengthen and hone our faith in a way that when Christianity was sort of the law of the land, doesn't allow us to do. It's so easy to be a Christian in the 1950s, when everybody was going to church. Now you have to think about it a little bit more. And those, it can be kind of sad, but it can also present ourselves with a great deal of opportunity to really figure out what we believe in and communicate it, most importantly, communicate it to our children.
Paul, part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation is that I love stories. I love films that tell good stories. I love books that tell good stories. I think that they're core to how we understand the world as both children and adults. These are the narratives that code into us how reality works and what values are, and how we should live. And they subconsciously influence us throughout our lives. And I'm not one that looks back on the Disney canon and says, oh, it's all just a bunch of negative expressive individualism that has coded us to be who we are. That's there. It's unquestionably there. There's a lot of stuff that I would not say has directed our culture in a positive direction. But there's also a huge treasury of wisdom and goodness and beauty and compelling character arcs that teach little kids and adults how to be human well, how to deal with tragedy, how to overcome difficulty, how to reconcile divisions. All of this stuff, speaks into our lives. And the reason I wanted to have this conversation was because, exactly like you said, there are many Christians right now who are essentially saying, we're done with Disney. We got to get out. We got to boycott this. I'm not going to tell you that's wrong at all, because what these Disney employees are saying is frightening and wrong and horrific, and I can understand the reaction. But I also want to avoid a reaction that takes us away from the beauty of storytelling, and that throws us into a place where we're trying to beat what the culture is offering through just didactic Sunday school lessons, like just telling kids, here's what you got to believe, here's who you are, without there being a compelling and beautiful story that's draped and empowered with art behind that. That's a mistake, I think. I think that's a recipe for losing not only the continuity of Christianity from generation to generation, but also something of our humanity, because beauty
absolutely.
is deeply human, and Disney and Pixar know what they're doing when it comes to beauty.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was really beautifully said. You know, when we look at our faith, it is all about story, right? God spoke creation into existence. Jesus taught through story. We are products of story, and just like us people, no story is perfect. I think that every story has its problems. Even the most Christian stories you can find have their problems. But you can find beauty and truth in so many of them. And when we find those elements in stories that we can embrace, that we can help take and transmit to the people in our lives who we love, that we want to teach some deep and resonant messages to, I think that it's just so important. I love story. That's why I do what I do. I find that stories, more than anything else, move me. I love hearing other people's stories, and it's with our stories that we bind ourselves together. Not only bind ourselves together personally, because I think we are all products of our stories, but bind ourselves together communally. You know, it gets back to telling stories around the campfire. They bond us together. And so when we find those elements that speak to a higher truth, as the best of Disney and Pixar can do, I think we need to continue to engage with those stories when we can.
We're just about out of time here. In fact, we are out of time. But I have this optimistic but very tentative idea that I want to run by you. And it is, I'm starting my own studio to make it. No, I'm kidding.
And you want me to be lead animator? Is that right?
There we go. Yeah. Well, let's see your stuff. Let's see your portfolio. No, this is my sort of maybe it's overly optimistic, but I have this sense that as these studios, if they go down this road of becoming very much more in your face about sexual revolution messaging, and trying to make that the point of their stories, or even a significant point of their stories, the quality of the stories is going to suffer vastly, because reality is given. It's not negotiable. We can't remake it however we like. And the fact is, there are certain things that are beautiful. There are certain things that are not beautiful. And I said this about a few years ago in an article, I think it was Speculative Faith, about J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter, which... so I love the Harry Potter stories, and I think they're marvelous. But for a few years there, all J.K. Rowling was doing was, acting like a dime store Twitter liberal, and just sort of farming her stories out to every cause du jour of the progressive left. And now finally she's decided to stand up on something, and she's now undesirable #1. But which is great. I love seeing that kind of backbone, even if we disagree on a ton of stuff. But the thing I wrote back then was that it was a question: why are J.K. Rowling's stories so much more conservative and Christian than their author? And my conclusion was that, well, if you want to write good stories, you have to write something approximating reality, the real values and the real truths of the world. And that's what she's done intuitively. And that's why it resonates with people. And had she written a hyper-progressive story, it wouldn't resonate with people. So tell me, how far do you think these studios can go in the direction of becoming in-your-face propaganda before they suffer and no longer have the appeal they do?
You know, it's a really interesting question, and I think that we're going to be seeing some case studies very soon about that, right? Yeah. I just reviewed a movie on Disney Plus called Better Nate Than Ever, which is not an animated movie, but it definitely taps into the kind of the worst of Disney perennially, sort of this idea of chasing your dreams. But it also had a fairly openly gay character as its main protagonist. And the thing that struck me as I was watching it is that it is very much a product of its time. It feels like it's very 2022. Mm. When you think about what Disney has done, one of the words that comes to mind is timeless. The best of Disney is timeless. We're still watching Snow White, for heaven's sake, 90 years after it was made. You have these
C.S. Lewis and
stories.
Tolkien saw Snow White.
That's exactly right. That's a great little perspective there. When you find a beautiful story, it is not hooked into an era or a decade. It transcends time. We can tell it to our children, to our grandchildren. Our grandparents can tell us stories that still resonate with us. That's why the Bible has been around for as long as it has. One of the reasons is because it is filled with timeless truths and timeless stories that we can refer to time and time and time again. I think that as we move forward, a lot of what we see on the horizon, on the cultural horizon, is just not timeless. We are telling stories of the moment that will resonate with a certain audience of the moment, but they will wash away just like sand, And I think that you will find, even in this era, you will find Disney and Pixar telling some beautiful stories that will stand the test of time, that we will be able to embrace in 2050 just as we do now. But those things may be a little bit rarer.
Yeah, and so we have to do our duty as good dads and sit down beforehand and watch the movies, or go read your reviews at Plugged In. Speaking of which, tell us where we can go to find more of your work and to follow all your reviews.
You bet. I do most of my formal reviews at pluggedin.com. I also have a blog on Pathos, which is Watching God. So if you do a search for Pathos, Watching God, you'll find my stuff. And I get a little bit deeper in some of those blogs. I also have a Twitter feed at acpaul if you care to follow me. But yeah, and I write for some other publications on sometimes as well. But you can find most of my stuff at pluggedin.com.
That's terrific. My guest today has been Paul Asay, journalist, author, and movie critic for Focus on the Family's Plugged In. You can check out his review of Encanto and Turning Red at Plugged In, and his blog, like he said, at pathos.com. It's titled Watching God. Paul, thanks so much for joining me today on Upstream. It's been a fun conversation.
It's been my pleasure. Super fun.